The fluorescent lights of Rossetti's diner hummed their familiar song, the one that had become the soundtrack of my life. 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, 43 minutes until closing, and I could already feel the ache spreading through my feet like spilled coffee. I wiped down the counter for the third time that hour, the rag moving in practiced circles. The pattern kept my mind from wandering to rent due in 5 days, and my car needing new brakes I couldn't afford. This was safer. The repetition, the rhythm, the small corners of control I could still maintain. The diner was nearly empty. Just old Tommy in booth 3, nursing black coffee and reading yesterday's newspaper like it contained prophecy, and a couple in the back corner who'd been too busy making eyes at each other to actually eat their food. The bell above the door chimed. I didn't look up at first. You learn not to anticipate in this job. Anticipation makes you clumsy. But something in the quality of the silence changed. A subtle shift. Like the air had been reorganized. 3 men entered. Not together exactly, but in formation. The kind of formation that wasn't accidental. The first man stopped just inside the threshold. He was tall, maybe 6'2", wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than my monthly rent. Dark hair, slicked back with precision. A scar bisected his left eyebrow, thin and white as old bone. His eyes were the color of gunmetal, and they scanned the diner like he was cataloging exits. My stomach tightened. I'd learned to read people in this job. Bartenders and waitresses develop an instinct, a way of knowing when someone carried violence the way other people carried keys. This man carried it like a weapon he'd never set down. The other 2 spread out behind him. They didn't sit. One stood near the door, blocking it casually, like he'd simply chosen that spot to admire the laminate. The other moved toward the kitchen, and I heard Vinny's sharp intake of breath from behind the counter. Don't, I said quietly. Not to the men. To the fear that was beginning to claw at my ribs. The man with the scar walked to the counter. His shoes clicked against the tile floor with each step, methodical, unhurried. He sat on a stool exactly in the middle, the stool that wobbled slightly if you didn't balance your weight right. He balanced perfectly. Coffee, he said. His voice was low and even, like gravel being poured onto a still lake. Black. I moved. That was what you did when someone like that gave an instruction in that tone. You moved. My hands were steady as I poured. I was grateful for that. I set the cup down in front of him, and he lifted it to his lips without changing his expression. His eyes didn't leave the small television mounted in the corner, playing the news with the sound off. Somewhere inside my chest, my heartbeat had become something I could feel in my teeth. The door chimed again. A 4th man entered. Younger, maybe late 20s, wearing a leather jacket that might have been expensive, or might have been trying very hard to look that way. He had the hunted look of someone who'd made a mistake and couldn't unmake it. Sal, the young man said, and his voice shook. Sal, I can explain. No. The man on the stool, Sal, didn't even look at him. He sipped his coffee with the kind of calm that made my mouth go dry. You can't. What happened next lived in the space between one breath and the next. The young man reached into his jacket. The movement was sudden, desperate, the kind of movement made by someone who'd already lost and was betting everything on a final play. His hand came out holding a gun, small and dark, and for one impossible moment, the entire diner stopped existing. I saw Sal's fingers tighten around the coffee cup. I saw the man at the door step forward, his hand already moving to his hip. I saw Tommy's newspaper flutter to the floor. And I saw the young man's hands shake as he pointed the gun at Sal, and I saw his finger finding the trigger, and I understood with the clarity of absolute certainty that he was going to pull it. Something in me, some ancient instinct that predates thought, moved without consulting my brain. I dropped. not backward, not sideways. I grabbed the industrial coffee pot and I hurled it forward in a straight arc, not at Sal, but at the young man, at the gun, at the exact angle where the trajectory would intersect with his hand in the fraction of a second before his finger completed its contraction. The pot connected with a wet, hollow sound. The gun went off. Not at Sal, but upward, the bullet punching through the ceiling with a sound like the sky breaking. Coffee sprayed across the young man's face, across his hands, and he screamed. A raw animal sound that filled the small space of the diner like water filling a room. The man at the door moved faster than anything human should move. He was on the young man in 2 strides, and there was a sickening crack like a tree branch snapping, and then silence. Just the hum of the fluorescent lights, and the young man's body falling to the tile floor like a sack dropped from a height. I was still holding the handle of the coffee pot. For a long moment, nobody moved. Tommy had his hands over his head. The couple in the back corner was frozen, the man halfway out of the booth like he'd turned to stone mid-escape. Then Sal turned. Slowly. His eyes, those gunmetal eyes, found mine. "You just," he said, very softly, "saved my life." It wasn't gratitude in his voice. It was something more dangerous than that. It was recognition. "I need to sit down," I whispered. "No," he said. "You need to understand what you just did." He stood, placed a $5 bill on the counter with the same methodical care he'd used to sip his coffee, and walked toward me. Up close, he was even larger. His shoulders blocked out the kitchen lights. I could smell him. Expensive cologne, cigarette smoke from someone else's jacket, and something darker underneath. Something like brass. He reached out and took the coffee pot handle from my numb fingers. "What's your name?" he asked. "Grace," I managed. "Grace Marino." He set the pot down carefully on the counter beside me, and I watched as his scarred fingers released it. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped even lower, barely a vibration in the air. "Grace Marino," he repeated, tasting my name like wine he was evaluating. "In about 30 seconds, my people are going to call someone. In about 10 minutes, the police will arrive. They will take statements. They will find a burglar who tried to rob the diner and was stopped by circumstance and luck." "I don't understand," I said. "That's good." He stepped back. His eyes moved away from mine, and the weight lifted just enough for me to breathe. "Keep not understanding. It will keep you alive longer." He turned and walked back to the counter, to the fallen young man on the floor. He looked down at the body with the expression of someone observing an ant that had wandered into his house. "Vinny," he called toward the kitchen. "Yeah?" My boss's voice was small, terrified. "She doesn't work here anymore. She works for me now. You'll send her paycheck to an address I'll provide, and you forget this night, all of it. Understood?" "Understood," Vinny whispered. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Sal turned back to me one final time, and the weight returned. The pressing, suffocating weight of his complete and total attention. "Tomorrow," he said, 10 in the morning, outside your apartment. Pack a bag. Comfortable clothes." "Why?" The word came out as a croak. "Because," he said, moving toward the door where his men were already waiting, "you just became a liability. And liabilities need to be managed." He left. His men left with him. The door chimed. The diner filled with the sound of Tommy's shaking exhale, the couple scrambling for the exit, the young man's blood beginning to seep across the tiles. My knees buckled. I caught myself on the counter, and I stared at the $5 bill he'd left behind. Pristine, folded once, placed with precision. 30 seconds felt like a lie. The sirens were already wailing in the distance, getting closer, and I understood with the clarity of absolute certainty that my life had just fractured into a before and an after, and there was no way to go back. The police arrived with the precision of an invading army. I gave my statement in a state of detachment that felt almost clinical. The detective was kind, tired but kind, and I lied to him with the ease of someone suddenly discovering she had a talent for it. A robbery attempt, a man with a gun, a moment of quick thinking. The coffee pot was heavy. It had knocked the gun aside. An accident of timing and dumb luck. He nodded and wrote and didn't quite believe me, but there was nothing to disbelieve. The gun was gone. The body was gone. Sal's men had moved with the efficiency of people who'd done this before, removing the evidence in the 3 minutes before sirens turned the parking lot into a crime scene. By 3 a.m., I was sitting in my apartment on Edgemont Street, in the studio that was all I could afford, staring at a wall. The fear should have been simple. Fear would have made sense. Instead, what moved through me was something more complicated. A tangle of survival instinct and something else. Something that had awakened when his eyes found mine. Recognition. That's what he'd called it. But recognition of what? I didn't sleep. I lay on my bed, a mattress on a box spring, no frame because I'd needed the money for my phone bill, and I watched the darkness congeal. My hands kept replaying the moment I'd thrown the coffee pot. The weight of it, the heat, the certainty that I was going to die. By 6 in the morning, I was showering. By 7, I was pulling clothes from my closet. The few things that were clean, that didn't smell like the diner's grease and desperation. Jeans, a sweater in dark gray, practical shoes. By 9:45, I was standing outside my building, a canvas bag at my feet with enough clothes for a week, my toothbrush, and the cash I'd been saving, $1,347, because every instinct I had was screaming that I needed to be able to run. The black SUV pulled up at exactly 10 a.m. It was the kind of vehicle that looked like it had been designed to carry dangerous people. Tinted windows, expensive rims, the kind of thing that made neighbors pause on their way to work and think things about God and fate. The rear window descended with a soft electric whine. It was one of Sal's men from the diner, the one who'd been stationed at the door. He had a scarred face and eyes the color of wet concrete. "In," he said. "Am I being arrested?" I asked. "Not yet," he said, and the corner of his mouth twitched. It might have been humor, or might have been a muscle spasm induced by violence. With men like this, it was hard to tell. I got in the SUV. The interior was cool, leather, and it smelled like air conditioning and expensive aftershave. Sal was in the back seat, and the second I saw him in daylight, something in me reorganized itself. He was wearing a pale gray suit over a black shirt with no tie. His dark hair was still slicked back with that same precision, and the scar above his eye was more visible in the morning light, a thin line of white that made him look like he'd been split open once and sewn back together. "Morning," he said. There was no kindness in his voice, but there was something else. A casual ownership that made my skin prickle. "Where are we going?" I asked. "Does it matter?" "Yes." He turned to look at me fully then, and I realized I'd made a mistake. Men like him didn't expect questions. They expected compliance. "It matters to me," I said, softer. "I'd like to know." Something flickered across his face. Not quite amusement. Closer to approval. "A safe house," he said, "about an hour north. You'll stay there. You'll be comfortable. You won't leave." "For how long?" "Until I decide it's safe." "Safe from what?" I turned toward him, and my heart rate spiked as I realized how close he was. Close enough that I could see the faint stubble on his jaw, the way his fingers rested on his thigh, the gold signet ring on his left hand bearing an insignia I didn't recognize. "From the man who tried to kill you?" "From everyone who now knows you're the only witness to his attempt," Sal said. including the people who sent him. The SUV pulled away from the curb, merging into traffic with the smooth inevitability of a shark entering water. I pressed my back against the seat and tried to breathe slowly. This is not what I signed up for. You signed up the moment you threw that coffee pot, he said. Before that, you were invisible. After that, he paused, and something in his eyes grew darker. After that, you became mine to protect, or someone else's to hunt. I prefer the former. I didn't ask for your protection. No, he agreed. You asked for a job that pays minimum wage and a boss who doesn't respect you. You got brutes who leer and customers who leave quarters as tips, and a life that's slowly suffocating you. You don't know anything about my life, I said, but the words felt hollow. I know you live in a studio apartment on Edgemont Street. I know your mother is dead. 3 years. Breast cancer. I know your father left when you were 6 and you don't talk about it. I know you have a degree in art history that you use to hang paintings in a diner owned by a man who cheats on his taxes. He turned away from me, looking out the window. I know you're brave. And I know you're afraid. And I know you're more intelligent than your current circumstances suggest. I felt something cold slip down my spine. How do you know any of that? Because I make it my business to know important things, he said. And as of yesterday, you became important. We drove in silence. The city fell away, replaced by highways and then by tree lines, and I watched Sal's reflection in the tinted window, the way his fingers kept time to music I couldn't hear, the way his jaw clenched and unclenched, the way he seemed to be fighting something internal. What's your name? I asked, because I needed to ground myself in something real. Your full name? Salvatore, he said. Salvatore Moretti. The name meant something. I could feel it in the way it sat in the air between us, heavy, historical, the kind of name that had weight in certain circles. And what do you do, Salvatore Moretti? I asked. He turned back to me, and his eyes were flat, empty, a door closing. I'm a businessman, he said. Import and export. That's a lie. Yes, he agreed. But it's a lie you should believe. People who ask too many questions about what I do tend to regret it. The man from the diner asked questions. That's why he came with a gun. Sal's expression didn't change, but something shifted. In him, a tightening around his mouth. Yes. What happened to him? Nothing you need to worry about. That's not an answer. No, he said, it's a boundary. Learn to respect them, and you'll live longer. The SUV turned onto a private road marked with a sign that said, "No trespassing" in red letters. Trees pressed in on either side, tall oaks and pines that blocked out the sky. How long do you plan to keep me? I asked. As long as necessary. Days? Weeks? Until the men who want you dead understand that killing you would be more trouble than you're worth, he said. Sometimes that's quick. Sometimes it takes patience. And what if I'm not content to sit somewhere safe while you do whatever it is you do? He smiled then, a real smile, not the expression of someone baring their teeth, but something almost warm. Then, he said, we're going to have problems. The house was breathtaking, and I hated it immediately. Pale limestone walls rose against the darkening sky, all glass and clean lines, the kind of modern architecture that screamed money and taste in equal measure. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed empty rooms, a living space without life. A kitchen designed for function, not comfort. A library with books that looked like they'd never been opened. This is where you'll stay, Sal said, leading me through the entrance. His footsteps echoed. Mine did too. The east wing. You'll have the bedroom, the bathroom, and a sitting room. You won't enter the west wing. You won't attempt to leave the property. And if I do? Then I'll have to lock you in, he said, and it wasn't a threat. It was a statement of logistics. The east wing was smaller but somehow warmer. Pale cream walls, a bed with real pillows, a window that looked out over a vast garden that had been allowed to grow wild. On the nightstand, someone had left a phone. "For emergencies only," Sal said. "The number is already programmed." To who? To me. I set my bag down on the bed, and the gesture felt final. Like I was unpacking a new life instead of just leaving things temporarily. "I'll have someone bring meals," he continued. "There are books in the library downstairs. There's a television. I'll arrange for whatever you need." "What if what I need is to leave?" He moved to the window and looked out at the wild garden. The scar on his eyebrow caught the last light of day. "You don't," he said. "Not until I tell you it's safe." "You keep saying that, but you haven't explained what safety looks like. What happens when it's time? Do you just let me go? Back to my apartment? My job?" He turned to face me, and in the dimming light, he looked almost human. Tired, like someone carrying something too heavy to name. "I don't know," he said, and the admission seemed to cost him. "I've never had to protect someone before. Not like this. Not someone innocent." "Then why take me? You could have found another safe house, kept me there, sent someone else to check on me. You didn't need to." I gestured at the space between us. "This." "Because," he said quietly, "if you belong to no one, then anyone can claim you. Putting you under my protection means anyone who touches you is making a decision about me. That changes the calculation. I don't belong to you." "Not yet," he said. "But the world doesn't know that. The world sees you survived something no one was supposed to survive. The world sees a man looking at a woman the way I look at you. The world makes assumptions." My breath hitched. "The way you look at me?" He seemed to realize what he'd revealed and closed the door on it, turning away. "There's a security system. I'll give you the code. Use it only if something feels wrong." He walked toward the door, and some part of me, the part that had been terrified and small, wanted him to stay. The other part, the larger part, wanted him gone so I could breathe. "Sal," I said. He paused in the doorway, his hand on the frame. "Why don't you just kill them? The people who want me dead. If you're what I think you are, couldn't you just make the problem go away?" He looked back at me over his shoulder, and his expression was something I'd never seen before, somewhere between regret and honesty. "I could," he said. "I've been considering it. But killing people tends to create more problems than it solves. Families, friends, debts owed, vengeance cycles." He paused. "I'm trying not to be the person who solves all his problems with violence, for no reason I can adequately explain." He left before I could respond, and I heard his footsteps moving down the hallway, toward the west wing. Toward whatever he actually did when he wasn't speaking to frightened women in borrowed houses. I lasted exactly 4 hours before I couldn't take the silence anymore. The house after dark felt like a tomb. The pale walls seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Every sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of settling foundations, made my skin crawl. I found him in the study. The door to the west wing opened just enough to spill light into the hallway. The room was beautiful in a way that felt dangerous. Dark wood paneling, floor-to-ceiling shelves with books that actually looked red, a fireplace with embers still glowing. Sal was in a leather chair, wearing reading glasses I hadn't known he owned, holding a first edition of something I couldn't make out. When he looked up and saw me, he didn't move. He just took the glasses off carefully and set the book aside. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Can't breathe," I said. "This place feels like a mausoleum." "It's meant to be secure, not comfortable. It's meant to be a prison." He gestured to the chair across from him. I wanted to refuse. I sat down anyway. "I'm sorry," he said, and the sincerity of it startled me. I'm not good at this. At making people feel safe. I'm good at fear. I'm good at control. Making someone actually comfortable. He trailed off. It's not a skill I've developed. Then develop it, I said. Tell me something true. Something that isn't about strategy or protection or whatever this is. He was quiet for a long time. The fire crackled. Outside, wind moved through the trees, and I realized the house wasn't isolated. It was just far enough from everything to be private. When I was 8, he finally said, my mother took me to a museum. We didn't have money for things like that. My father was building his empire, and entertainment was considered wasteful. But she took me anyway, because she wanted me to see something beautiful before the world taught me that beauty doesn't matter. He stood and walked to the shelves, running his finger along the spines. We walked through galleries for hours. I remember standing in front of a painting, Caravaggio, I think, though I'm not certain anymore. It was of a man betraying another man, and I remember asking my mother why anyone would paint something so ugly, and she said, because sometimes you need to put the ugly on the wall so you remember that the beautiful things are worth protecting. He turned back to me. She died a week later. Car accident. My father's enemies. It was never fully clear. Sal, I whispered. I've spent 23 years making sure no one could touch the beautiful things in my life ever again, he continued. And then you walked into a diner and threw a coffee pot, and you had this look on your face, like you were terrified but you didn't care, like the fear didn't matter as much as doing what needed to be done. And I realized I'd forgotten why I was doing any of this. He came back to the chair and sat on the arm, close enough that I could see the details of his scar up close. It ran from his eyebrow down toward his temple, thin and precise, like it had been cut by something sharp. What happened to you? I asked, reaching out before I could stop myself. My fingers found the scar, traced it from beginning to end. His skin was warm under my touch. A man with a straight razor, he said quietly. When I was 17. He wanted to teach me that I wasn't as untouchable as I thought. He was partially successful. Did you kill him? Eventually, he said. It took longer than it should have. I wanted him to suffer. And that. He turned to look at me. That made me someone I didn't want to be. I pulled my hand away, and he caught it before it could fall. His fingers wrapped around mine, not rough, not forceful, just holding. You're safe here, he said. Not because I'm keeping you imprisoned, because I'm going to make sure nothing touches you. Including me, if that's what you need. That's not what I need, I heard myself say. His eyes changed, darkened, shifted, became something that made my pulse quicken. You don't know what I am, he said. I know you read first editions in a stone house north of the city. I know you care about beautiful things. I know you're trying not to be the worst version of yourself. That's not knowing what I am. That's knowing what you want me to be. Then tell me, I said. Tell me what you are. He stood and walked to the fireplace, and I watched his shoulders rise and fall with breath he seemed to be counting. I'm a man who has killed people, he said. I'm a man who will kill again if necessary. I'm a man who owns a criminal enterprise worth $40 million. I'm a man who has betrayed trusts and made deals with the devil and destroyed families. I'm a man who can't even remember how many people I've hurt. He turned back to me. And I'm a man who looked at you through his gun sights and decided you were worth more alive than dead, which makes me dangerous in a new way, because now I have something to lose. 3 days into my captivity, and I'd stopped lying to myself about what it was, Sal stopped coming home at night. The first evening, I thought he was avoiding me because of what had happened in the study. That moment had hung between us like something physical, and I'd spent the subsequent morning and afternoon replaying every second. His hand holding mine, the sound of his confession, the way his eyes had looked when I said I wasn't afraid. But by evening, the reality set in. He was gone. Actually gone. Not just retreating to another wing of the house. I found myself wandering the east wing like a ghost, then into the main part of the house, finally into the west wing, the part he'd explicitly told me not to enter. It was exactly what I would have expected from a man like him. The west wing was functional. There was an office with a mahogany desk and 3 monitors that were dark when I walked past. There was a meeting room with a long table. There was a kitchen that looked like it had been designed for serious cooking, though something about the pristine surfaces suggested it was rarely used. And there was a bedroom that made my throat tight. It was large, with high ceilings and floor-to-ceiling windows covered by heavy blackout curtains. The bed was enormous, a California king with navy bedding that looked expensive. On the nightstand, a photo in a silver frame. A woman who looked like Sal, same dark hair, same strong features, was laughing at something outside the frame. She was beautiful and young, and she had his eyes. I put the photo back carefully and left the room feeling like I'd violated something sacred. The second evening, he still wasn't back. I was beginning to understand that protection and imprisonment were sometimes the same thing with slightly different branding. The third evening, his security team arrived. There were 5 of them, moving through the house with the efficiency of people who'd done this before. One set up additional cameras in the east wing. Another checked every window and door lock. A third swept the perimeter with what looked like a metal detector, though I couldn't imagine what it was scanning for. The fourth one, a woman with dark red hair and a scar across her left cheekbone, introduced herself as Miranda. She was wearing a shoulder holster with the kind of comfort that suggested she used it regularly. "Sal sent me," she said, "to stay with you until he's back. There's been some activity." "Activity," I repeated. "The people looking for you just made contact with someone Sal has a relationship with. A federal agent who'd prefer to stay alive. This agent has now requested a meeting to discuss terms." "What kind of terms?" "You in exchange for certain guarantees," Miranda said. She didn't look apologetic about it, just factual. "Don't worry, Sal's not interested in that particular trade." "How reassuring," I said dryly, "for someone I've known for 3 days." "He waited a week before having someone like me move in," Miranda said. "Trust me, 3 days is unprecedented." I wanted to ask what that meant, but Sal's voice answered before I could form the question. "It means he usually doesn't let anyone close enough to be endangered," Miranda continued, walking to the window. "In his position, that's a good policy. People betray him less often when they're not attached to anything." "And now? Now he's got you. Which means he's got a vulnerability. And vulnerabilities are how empires fall." The fear I'd been managing, compartmentalizing, controlling, keeping at arm's length, surged up with sudden ferocity. I'd been so focused on the immediate danger that I hadn't fully considered the larger picture. "He's going to get himself killed protecting me," I said. "Probably not," Miranda said. "Sal's survived worse. But the fact that you're worried about that tells me everything I need to know about why he's so interested." Sal didn't return that night either. By the 4th day, I was climbing the walls. The house felt smaller, despite its size. Every room seemed to close in on me. I finally found myself in the library, reading a book I wasn't absorbing, when I heard the front door open. I didn't run to meet him. I had too much pride for that. Or maybe too much fear. Instead, I waited, listening to his footsteps move through the house. When he appeared in the doorway to the library, I could see the exhaustion written across him like a second skin. His suit was rumpled. There was blood on his right hand. A small amount, a cut across his knuckles that looked relatively fresh. "You're hurt," I said. "I'm fine," he said. But he walked to the sink in the adjacent bathroom and started washing the blood away with water that turned pink as it swirled down the drain. What happened? The federal agent wanted clarification on whether I was serious, he said, not looking at me. I convinced him that I was. Sal? Don't ask what I did, Grace. You don't want to know. He dried his hands on a towel, and I saw that the cut was deeper than it had initially appeared. I stood and walked to him, and this time I didn't ask permission before I took his hand and examined it. You need stitches. I've had worse. That's not an answer. I went to the bathroom and found the first aid kit, and I made him sit while I cleaned the wound properly and used surgical tape to pull the edges together. He watched my hands while I worked, not moving, barely breathing. Why did you leave? I asked. Because the people who want you dead need to understand that negotiating is possible, but the asking price is higher than they're willing to pay. By doing what? By making an example of the federal agent. Not killing him, just reminding him that there are consequences to being in a conversation where he shouldn't be. You broke his hand, I said. It wasn't a question. His dominant hand, yes. Jesus, Sal. He'll heal, he said flatly, and he'll think twice before trying to broker a deal with people who want to hurt you. I finished taping the cut and stepped back. This isn't sustainable. You can't protect me by making the world afraid of you. Watch me, he said. No, I said. I won't. Because that person, the one who breaks people's hands to send messages, that's not who you want to be. You said that. You said your mother showed you something beautiful, and you've been protecting it ever since. He stood, and the motion was sudden, violent enough to make me step back. You don't understand, he said, his voice low and dangerous. You don't understand what I've done to keep you alive. You don't understand the promises I've made, the debts I've incurred, the lines I've crossed. Then explain it to me. I can't. He walked away from me, toward the door. Because the moment you understand it, you'll realize that my protection isn't worth what it's costing, and you'll try to leave, and I can't let you do that. Sal! He turned back, and his eyes were dark with something I couldn't name. Go to your room, he said. Lock the door. Don't come out until morning. Why? Because I'm very close to doing something we'll both regret, he said quietly. And right now, the only thing between me and that is distance. The storm came in the night. I didn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the wind move through the trees, listening to rain assault the windows, and I thought about distance. How it was supposed to help. How Sal thought that if he just put enough space between us, he could prevent something inevitable. At 2 a.m., the power went out. The house went black. Total, absolute darkness that felt like drowning in ink. I heard the sudden silence of the air conditioning cutting off, the hum of the refrigerator dying, the end of every electronic comfort the house had been providing. I sat up, my heart rate spiking. Outside, the wind had become something wild and elemental, and I could hear branches cracking against the house like bones breaking. I grabbed my phone. No signal. The internet was dead. For several minutes, I sat frozen. Then I forced myself to move, to find the emergency kit that was somewhere. Somewhere in a house I'd been in for 4 days and still didn't fully understand. I opened my door and felt my way along the hallway, moving toward where I thought the main part of the house might be. The darkness was disorienting. My hands felt their way along the wall. Grace? His voice came from somewhere ahead, and it was different in the dark. Less controlled. More raw. Here, I called. Light bloomed. Sal was holding an old oil lantern, and in its glow, he looked almost biblical. Fire and shadow playing across his features. Backup generator should have kicked in, he said. But there might be a problem with the main lines. The storm? This area is prone to power outages during heavy weather. Usually not a problem. He came toward me. Usually I'm not here. But you are, I said. But I am. He agreed. He took my hand, not asking this time, just taking it, and led me downstairs. The house was a maze in darkness, and I was grateful for the lantern, grateful for his touch, grateful for anything that suggested I wasn't alone in this. The main room of the house was colder than it should have been. He set the lantern down and moved through the darkness with the ease of someone who'd learned to navigate by something other than sight. "There's a fireplace," he said, "and wood outside the service entrance. We'll weather this." But the wind was already getting worse. Even as he spoke, we heard a crack like a tree splitting, and something heavy hit the roof. "Sal." "I know," he said. He was already moving toward the western hallway. "Come with me. The master bedroom has reinforced windows. We'll shelter there." The master bedroom was dark, but once he got the fire going in the small fireplace, the room became almost warm. He brought blankets from the linen closet, arranged them on the floor in front of the fire. "This isn't proper," I said, looking at the setup. "Neither is the situation," he said. "Sit." I did. The blankets were soft, expensive. We were positioned at an angle where we could see the fire and the windows, where the darkness outside was less absolute. For a while, we didn't talk. We just existed in the space between the heat of the fire and the cold pressing against the windows. Outside, the storm raged with the fury of something alive and angry. "Tell me about the photograph," I said. He was quiet so long I thought he wouldn't answer. "My sister," he finally said. "Maria. She was 4 years younger than me." "Was." Past tense. I understood before he continued. "She was everything good in my family," he said. "Good nature. Kind. She wanted to be a doctor. She was 18 when they took her. The people who... my enemies. My father's enemies. It's sometimes hard to tell the difference." He was silent again. "They held her for 2 weeks. I found her. Or rather, I found what was left of her. I didn't ask what he'd done in response. I didn't need to. That's why you protect," I said. "That's why you can't let anyone close." "That's why I tried not to," he corrected. "But I'm discovering that I'm not very good at it anymore." The wind howled. A shutter on the other side of the house came loose, and I heard it banging rhythmically against the wall. "Are you scared?" he asked. "Of the storm?" "Of me." I considered lying. It would have been easier. "Sometimes," I said, "but not right now." He turned to face me fully, and in the firelight his expression was unguarded. I could see the exhaustion, the conflict, the weight of all his decisions pressing down on him. "If you had the chance to leave," he said, "right now, in the dark, when no one could stop you, would you take it?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "You should. You should take it and not look back." "Why are you letting me stay?" "Because," he said, and his voice dropped so low I almost couldn't hear it over the wind. "I'm selfish. And because you're the first beautiful thing I've been allowed to keep." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, and the gentleness of the motion made my eyes sting. "I want you," he said, "and I hate myself for it, but I want you." "I'm already here," I said. He leaned forward and I understood he was asking permission. I could have said no. I could have moved away. Instead, I stayed exactly where I was. His mouth found mine in the darkness, and it was tender and fierce and tasted like regret. He kissed me like he was trying to apologize for every terrible thing he'd done, and I kissed him back because somewhere in the last 4 days, I'd stopped being afraid of him and started being afraid of losing him. When he pulled back, we were both shaking. "This is a mistake," he said. "Probably," I agreed. "You're under my protection. You're dependent on me for safety. This is a terrible abuse of power." "Probably," I said again. He kissed me again, and this time there was no hesitation, just the weight of need and the acceptance that sometimes the right choice and the only choice are not the same thing. We didn't make love that night. Instead, we held each other in front of the fire while the world raged outside, and we let ourselves pretend that this moment, this shelter, this small pocket of peace, was all that existed. Morning came quietly. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind a kind of exhausted silence. The wind had stopped trying to murder us. The rain had gentled into a drizzle, and the power, when I checked my phone after Sal left to inspect the generator, had been restored at 6:47 a.m. I watched him move through the kitchen, making coffee with practiced efficiency, and tried to reconcile the man before me with the one who'd kissed me in front of the fire. He looked different in daylight. Harder, maybe, or perhaps just more honest. The generator had a pressure valve failure, he said, not looking at me. It's repairable. The roof has some damage. I'm calling the contractors this afternoon. Okay, I said. We should talk about last night, he continued, still not meeting my eyes. Should we? He poured coffee with the kind of concentration that suggested the coffee was vastly more important than the conversation. What happened was, he paused, searching for the word. Unavoidable, but it can't happen again. The rejection stung more than it should have. Okay. You're still in danger. You're still under my protection. Complicating that with... He gestured vaguely at the space between us. This compromises my judgment. Does it? I asked. Because from where I'm standing, it seems like your judgment has been compromised since the moment I threw that coffee pot. He finally looked at me, and something dark flickered across his face. Don't, he said. Don't what? Suggest that maybe your carefully controlled world isn't quite as controlled as you think? Don't make this about more than it is, he said. You experienced a traumatic event. I protected you. You're experiencing gratitude and mistaking it for attraction. It's a common psychological response. That's a lie, I said quietly. And you know it. He set the coffee cup down with deliberate care. Whether it's a lie or not doesn't matter. I'm the only thing standing between you and death. The moment you forget that, you forget that anything between us is fundamentally unbalanced. Then let me leave, I said. If the only issue is the power imbalance, then let me decide to stay. Let me choose this freely. The threat isn't gone, Grace. Then bring me with you. Let me see what you actually do. Let me understand who you are, and make an informed choice, instead of treating me like a child who doesn't understand the world. He turned away from me. I watched his shoulders tense, watched him wage whatever internal war he was fighting. If I do that, he finally said, you'll see things that will fundamentally change how you see me. I know, I said. I'm counting on it. He turned back, and his eyes were cold. You want me to show you? Fine. Get dressed. Wear something professional but not too nice, and understand that you can't unsee this. The warehouse was in a part of the city that didn't appear on tourist maps. It was mid-afternoon when Sal's car pulled into the loading area, a Mercedes S-Class, not the SUV, because apparently there were levels to his operations, and this particular level required more discretion. The warehouse itself was unremarkable. Brick walls, roll-up doors, the kind of space that could have contained anything from auto parts to stolen electronics. Inside, it contained something far more specific. Gambling, high-stakes gambling, the kind that required an entire infrastructure of dealers and security and money management. There were rooms filled with card tables, roulette wheels, a small sports betting operation with monitors on every wall. The men inside noticed Sal immediately. They straightened, adjusted themselves, made the tiny, unconscious movements that people make around someone with power. He nodded to them and led me deeper into the warehouse to an office that existed behind reinforced doors and biometric locks. Inside, there were ledgers. Actual paper ledgers, which I found oddly charming given that this was obviously a modern criminal enterprise. And on the wall, there was a map of the city with colored pins marking something. Territories, I realized. Different colored pins for different things. "Welcome to 1/3 of my operation," Sal said flatly. "Gambling, mostly, but also money laundering, which is the bread and butter of everything. The money from gambling, from drugs, from prostitution, from weapons deals. It all needs to be moved through the system so that it becomes untraceable. That's where the real money is. Not in the crimes themselves, but in making the crimes invisible." He pulled out one of the ledgers and opened it to a page at random. Columns of numbers, names, destinations. "This," he said, pointing at a transaction, "is money from a human trafficking ring. It's being processed through a series of casinos and legitimate businesses so that by the time it reaches its final destination, no one can track its origin. That money is destroying families." He turned the page. "This is from drug sales in the neighborhood where your mother used to work. Crack cocaine primarily, aimed at creating dependency and destroying communities. I profit from that destruction." He closed the ledger. "You wanted to know what I do. This is what I do. I facilitate crime. I protect criminals. I profit from suffering. And the remarkable thing is that I do it very, very well." He watched me process this. I could feel the weight of it settling on me, the reality of who he was crashing against the person he'd shown me in the dark. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. "Because you asked me to let you choose," he said. "But you can't choose something you don't understand. And I need you to understand that choosing me means choosing complicity. It means accepting that the money I use to keep you safe comes from destroying other people's safety." "So what?" I said quietly. "You're telling me that to justify protecting me, you need me to become as morally compromised as you are? I'm telling you that you can't fall in love with someone and ignore where their power comes from," he said. "Who said anything about love?" He stepped closer. "You did. 4 nights ago when you threw that coffee pot for a man you'd never met. You did the moment you stayed when you could have run. Love isn't always about time, Grace. Sometimes it's about recognition. Sometimes it's about seeing someone and knowing, down to your bones, that this particular person matters more than your own safety." "That's not love," I said. "That's Stockholm Syndrome." "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe it's just you. Maybe you're the kind of person who loves fiercely and without much regard for common sense." I walked away from him, toward the map on the wall. I looked at the colored pins, at the infrastructure of his empire. "The federal agent," I said. "The one you broke the hand of. What was he trying to do?" "Negotiate my surrender," Sal said, "in exchange for immunity for certain other parties." "What other parties?" "His partners. The people in his department who are on my payroll." I turned back. "You own police officers. I own judges too," he said, "and lawyers, and a city councilman. I own a significant percentage of municipal infrastructure. That's not a metaphor. I literally own property through shell corporations." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because," he said, and his voice broke slightly on the word, "I'm trying to scare you away. I'm trying very hard to give you an exit." "Well," I said, "you're failing." He walked to me in 3 strides, and he took my face in his hands, and he forced me to look at him. "Tell me you can't," he said. "Tell me you can't accept this." "I can't," I lied. He kissed me then, harder than before, like he was trying to convince himself through physical pressure that I was different, that I could be the reason to stop. I kissed him back, and my hands found the fabric of his shirt, and I understood that we were past the point of negotiation now. We were past the point of distance and wisdom, and all the logical reasons why this was a terrible idea. We were just two people in a warehouse full of blood money, making decisions we'd regret. The call came at 3 a.m. I woke to Sal already on his phone, his body tense beside me. We'd found our way to his bed eventually, and whatever moment of tenderness we'd discovered in the warehouse had followed us into sleep. Now it was shattered. "I don't care," he said into the phone. "I don't care if he's your cousin. I don't care if his father is sitting on the city council. He's a liability, and he needs to disappear." I couldn't hear the voice on the other end, just the quality of Sal's response, the cold efficiency of a man making decisions about people like they were pieces on a board. "No, not prison." I said disappear. He paused. "I know the risk. I've been calculating risks since I was 18 years old, and the risk of him talking is greater than the risk of him going missing. So it's done." He hung up. For a moment, he didn't move. Then he got out of bed and went to the window, looking out at the night. "Who?" I asked quietly. Someone who needed a reminder about the cost of betrayal. "Who?" I pressed. He turned back. "Miranda's nephew. He was running drugs out of the warehouse without authorization, keeping some of the proceeds. Very amateur. Very stupid. And you're going to have him disappeared," Sal finished. "Yes. Sent somewhere far away where he can't become a problem for anyone." "You mean killed?" "I mean what I said." "You're a liar," I said, and I got out of bed. "You look me in the eye and you say things that sound like choices, like other options exist, but they don't. You've already made the decision before the conversation starts. That's not true, isn't it?" I found my clothes and started dressing with movements that were sharper than necessary. "Show me his file. Show me Miranda's nephew. Show me the operation he was running. Maybe we can find another way." "There is no other way," Sal said. "Not in my world." "Then I don't want your world," I said. The words hung between us like something physical. I could see him process them, could see something break in his expression. "Grace, I'm leaving," I said. "I want you to take me back to my apartment tomorrow, and I don't want to see you after that. You're in danger. The threat hasn't disappeared." "Then I'll take my chances," I said. "I'd rather be dead than complicit in murder." He was silent for a long moment. "You don't mean that." "I do," I said, and I was surprised to find that it was partially true. "You showed me what you wanted me to see. A man trying not to be the worst version of himself. But that's not who you are, is it? You're the worst version, and you've just gotten good at performing decency when it suits you." "Grace, please." "Don't," I said. "Don't ask me to stay. Don't try to convince me. I can't—" My voice broke. "I can't watch what you become when you're not trying anymore." I finished dressing and moved toward the door. "I'll take you back tomorrow," he said behind me. "But not because you asked. Because you're right. I'm not good for you. I was never going to be good for you. The moment you threw that coffee pot, I should have arranged for you to disappear into a new life, instead of keeping you here where you had to see what I am." I turned back. He was standing in the window light, naked and vulnerable and terrible in his honesty. "If I do that," I continued, my voice steadier, "if I let you arrange for me to disappear, will you let the boy go? Will you give him a chance?" Something flickered across his face. Not hope, exactly, but maybe the ghost of it. "If I let him go," Sal said carefully, "then Miranda will be hurt, and her pain becomes my problem. And someone needs to be punished for that. That's how the system works, Grace. There are always consequences. There's always a price." "What if the price is me?" I asked. "What if you let him go and you let me disappear and you take that as the price for being decent for once?" He looked at me for a long time. I could see him working through the calculation, weighing the logistics of what I was suggesting. "If I do that," he finally said, I never see you again. No, I said. You don't. That would kill me faster than any bullet, he said quietly. Then I guess that's the price, I said. And I left him there, standing in the window light, and I lay on the couch in the main room and tried not to cry until dawn came. He didn't take me to my apartment the next day. Instead, at 4 a.m. there was a knock on the door of the safe house. I'd been pretending to sleep, had been packed since midnight, my canvas bag ready by the entrance. But when the door opened, it wasn't Sal who entered. It was one of his men, the scar-faced one who'd driven the SUV on that first day. "We have a problem," he said. The problem was currently in a black sedan outside the federal building, and his name was Special Agent Marcus Webb. Sal told me this in the car, his voice tight with controlled fury. Webb was the federal agent whose hand Sal had broken. But instead of accepting his exile, instead of understanding the message, Webb had decided to escalate. He'd been found at dawn dead in his car, a single bullet wound to the temple, a note in his hand that read, "For Salvatore Moretti." "They're saying I did it," Sal said as we drove through the city. "They're saying I've declared war on federal law enforcement, and in approximately 6 hours, they're going to issue a warrant for my arrest." "Did you?" I asked quietly. "No." His hands tightened on the steering wheel. "But it doesn't matter. The message is the same. Someone just framed me for the kind of crime that can't be forgiven. Someone just made sure that I'm now a fugitive." "Who?" "I have 3 hours to figure that out before we need to disappear," he said. He drove us not to the warehouse but to a neighborhood I didn't recognize. Old money, but old in the way that meant decay. Mansions that had seen better centuries, estates protected by high gates and security that looked decades out of date. He pulled through a gate marked with an intercom that didn't require him to speak, and we drove down a tree-lined path to a house that looked like it had been transplanted from 19th century Russia. "My mother's family," he said. "She was born into money. Real money, not criminal money. The kind that's been filtering through generations since before my grandfather learned how to make his own." The interior was all dark wood and oil paintings, and it smelled like old paper and furniture polish. An elderly woman was waiting in the main room. She had Sal's features, but softened by age, and his eyes, but warmer. "Salvatore," she said, and she held out her hands to him. He kissed her cheek, and I saw something in him soften. This was a man looking at a person he loved without the complication of danger or desire or betrayal. "Nonna," he said, "I need sanctuary, for a few days." "Of course," she said immediately. Then she noticed me. "And this is?" "Grace," Sal said. She's someone important." His grandmother looked at me with the kind of assessment that suggested she'd spent a lifetime reading people. "You're the waitress," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I said. "The one who saved his life." "Apparently." She smiled, and it was Sal's smile but with more warmth behind it. "Come, we have much to discuss." By evening we had a working theory. The elderly woman, Nonna Maria, had connections to people that even Sal didn't have, and with those connections came information. Webb hadn't been killed by Sal. He'd been killed by one of Sal's rivals, a man named Adriano Cesare, who controlled a competing operation on the south side of the city. Adriano wanted Sal out of the picture, but he wanted it to be legal. If he killed Sal directly, it would start a war that would destroy both their operations. But if he could frame Sal for a federal crime, the government would do the work for him. "It's almost elegant," Sal said bitterly, pacing the library of his grandmother's house. "Except for one flaw. Webb knew I didn't do it. Which means Adriano didn't kill Webb to frame me. He killed Webb to start a war between me and the federal government while he uses the chaos to move in." "So we go to the government," I said. "We provide evidence that you didn't do it. We give them Adriano as the alternative suspect." "And what evidence would that be?" Sal asked. My word? Against the word of a dead federal agent's partner, who I'm sure is very motivated to see me in prison. Your alibi, I said. You were with me. All night. He looked at me like I was suggesting something suicidal. I'm not using you as a witness, Grace. Why not? It's the truth. Because once you do that, you're entangled with me officially. You become a target. You become leverage. You become everything you're trying not to be. I understood then what he'd been trying to do, all along. Even when he was making terrible decisions about disappearing people and processing blood money, he'd been trying, in his own terrible way, to keep me separate, to keep some part of me untouched by what he was. And I was about to destroy that completely. I want to testify, I said to his grandmother. She looked at Sal. She didn't ask permission from him, just watched his face. No, he said. Yes, I said. I was with you. I can place you at the safe house, with the timestamps, with the landline call to your office that was made at 3:47 a.m. when Webb was being murdered. Grace, you want to know what my price is? I said. For falling in love with someone who's going to destroy me? It's this. It's being allowed to save you. It's getting to be the one who keeps you alive, instead of the other way around. He moved toward me, and I thought he was going to argue. Instead, he took my face in his hands the way he had in the warehouse, and he kissed me like it was the last time. You understand, he said, that I'm never going to be able to repay this. I know, I said. That's why I'm doing it. The federal courthouse was all stone and authority, and I was not dressed well enough for it. But Sal's lawyers, and he had very good lawyers, had assured me that my appearance mattered less than my testimony. What mattered was consistency, clarity, and the ability to not flinch when the prosecution tried to paint me as a jilted lover or a woman desperate to protect a man who'd manipulated her. I was none of those things, I told myself as I sat in the waiting area outside the courtroom. I was a woman who'd loved someone and who was willing to be destroyed to save him. The distinction was slight, but it mattered. The stand was smaller than I expected. The courtroom was smaller. The prosecutor was a woman in her 60s with the kind of hardened expression that suggested she'd spent decades fighting men like Sal. Ms. Marino, she said, establishing that she already knew my name and my background. You're testifying that Mr. Moretti was with you on the night in question? Yes, I said. From what time to what time? Approximately 9 p.m. until 6 a.m. the following morning. And you can swear under oath that he never left your vicinity during that period? I can, I said. Even though it was dark due to the storm. Even though the power was out. Even though the safe house is large enough that you wouldn't necessarily hear if he'd left through a different exit. He was with me, I said. Tell me, Ms. Marino, how would you describe your relationship with Mr. Moretti? I hesitated. This was the trap. This was where she wanted me to admit to love, to bias, to the kind of emotional entanglement that would make my testimony unreliable. I would describe it, I said carefully, as complicated. He saved my life. I saved his. We've developed feelings for each other. Feelings, she repeated. Strong feelings? Yes. The kind of feelings that would make you lie to a federal court to protect him? Yes, I said. Absolutely. I would lie for him. I would commit crimes for him. I would destroy myself for him. But I'm not lying right now. The prosecutor seemed taken aback by my honesty. So how can the court trust that your testimony is truthful? You can't, I said. You have to evaluate the evidence independent of how you feel about my credibility. You have to look at the phone records and the security footage and the timeline and decide whether my testimony makes sense in that context, whether it corroborates facts that can be verified. She stared at me for a long moment. Then she moved on to other questions, and I answered them all with the same brutal honesty. By the time Sal's lawyer had his opportunity to re-examine me, I was exhausted. But when I looked toward the gallery and saw him, sitting in a suit that probably cost more than my annual salary, his scarred face serious and still, I understood that this exhaustion was nothing. This was the small price of admitting what I actually felt. The trial lasted 6 weeks. We didn't see each other during that time. His lawyer had advised against it, and I'd agreed. Instead, we communicated through brief messages that I knew were being monitored, and we waited. In the end, the prosecution's case fell apart. The evidence was thin. My testimony, when combined with phone records and building security, was ironclad. And most damaging for the prosecution, a new witness came forward, one of Webb's partners, who admitted under oath that Webb had been the one investigating Sal, had been the one who'd gotten too close to operations he shouldn't have. The suicide angle started to look more plausible, the murder angle less. Adriano Cesare was arrested 2 weeks later. The evidence against him was more robust. Sal was acquitted. I waited for him outside the courthouse, even though his lawyers had told me not to. I waited because I needed to know if what I'd done had changed anything. If saving him had made me closer to him, or if it had simply placed me deeper in the machinery of his world. He came out and saw me, and the expression on his face, relief, regret, love, loss, told me that the answer was complicated. We didn't speak in the courthouse. We didn't speak in the car. We drove to his apartment, a penthouse in a building owned by one of his shell corporations, and we rode the elevator in silence. Only when we were alone in his space, modern, cold, nothing like the warmth of his grandmother's house, did he speak. "I'm leaving the operation," he said. I couldn't have heard him correctly. "What?" "I'm transferring everything to my lieutenant. The gambling, the money laundering, the protection rackets, all of it. I'm walking away." "Why?" "Because you were right," he said. "I can't keep asking you to love a man who profits from destruction. But I also can't keep being that man and expect you to stay. Sal, let me finish," he said. "I have enough money that I'll never work again. My family has legitimate businesses, real estate, technology startups, art collection. I'm going to move into that world. I'm going to become respectable. It's going to be slow, and it's going to take years, and it's probably going to be the hardest thing I've ever done because I'm fundamentally not a respectable person." He moved closer. "But I'm going to do it. For you. Not because I think I deserve forgiveness, but because I think I deserve a chance to be better." "What if you can't?" I asked. "What if you try and you fail?" "Then you'll be free to leave," he said. "No questions, no drama, just a clean exit." "And if I want to leave now?" "Then you're free to do that too," he said. "I won't stop you. I won't try to convince you. You've paid your debt to me. You don't owe me anything." I looked at this man who'd been broken and dangerous and protective and tender and terrible. This man who'd shown me violence and who'd also shown me the library in his grandmother's house, and the way he'd looked at an old book like it contained the memory of something precious. "I don't want to leave," I said. "You don't have to decide now. You can—" "I don't want to leave," I said again. "I want to watch you try to be respectable. I want to watch you fail and try again. I want to be terrible with you." He kissed me then, and it felt different than before. Lighter, maybe, like the weight of his choices was still there, but at least now it was shared. 6 months later, I was standing in a gallery in Manhattan, watching Sal explain the provenance of a Caravaggio to a collector from London. He was good at it. Better than I would have expected, actually. He had a genuine knowledge of art that went deeper than just knowing the price of things. He talked about brushwork and intentionality, and the way suffering looked different when it was rendered in light. He caught my eye across the room and smiled, and I thought about how strange it was that the man who'd once ordered people to disappear was now spending his evenings in galleries and his mornings reading philosophy texts. The transition hadn't been easy. The first month he'd nearly gone back a dozen times. There were people who wanted to reclaim what they'd lost when he'd stepped away from power. There were debts that needed collecting, favors that needed calling in. It would have been easy to slip back into the role that he'd perfected over 2 decades. Instead, he'd written checks. He'd liquidated assets. He'd very deliberately burned bridges. The crime wasn't gone. You don't just leave that world without consequences, but he'd stopped being part of it. There were still threats, but they were the kind of threats that could be managed by lawyers instead of violence. And slowly, impossibly, he'd started to actually change. "You're staring," he said as we left the gallery later that evening. "I am," I admitted. "Having second thoughts?" "No," I said, just marveling. "At you. At this." "At what specifically?" We were walking through Manhattan at night, and the city was beautiful in that way that only cities are when you're with someone you love. The lights reflected off his face, and I could see the scar more clearly than usual, and I realized it had stopped looking like a mark of violence to me. Now it just looked like a map of where he'd been. "That a man can change?" I said. "Not dramatically, not all at once, but actually, genuinely change, one day at a time." He took my hand, and his ring, the gold signet ring that used to mean something about power and territory, caught the light. "I haven't changed that much," he said. "I'm still ruthless. I'm still capable of violence. I still own more than I deserve, and some of it came from places I'd prefer not to think about." "I know," I said. "And you're okay with that?" "No," I said. "But I'm choosing it anyway, because the alternative is loving someone perfect, and perfect people don't exist. And if they did, they wouldn't be interesting." We walked in silence for a while. Then he stopped me on a bridge overlooking the East River, and he dropped to one knee. My heart rate spiked. "Sal, this isn't a proposal," he said quickly. "Not yet, anyway. I learned that ambushing you is not a good strategy. This is just—" He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small box. "Me telling you that I want to spend the rest of my life with you, and I'm asking if that's something you might want too." He opened the box. The ring inside was not what I would have expected. Not a large diamond, but a sapphire, deep and dark, surrounded by smaller diamonds in an antique setting. "It was my mother's," he said. "From before she married my father, from when she still thought she might have a choice about her life." I started to cry, which was embarrassing on a public bridge. "Yes," I said. "Yes to the ring, or yes to—" "Yes to all of it," I said. "Yes to you. Yes to this. Yes to whatever comes next." He slipped the ring onto my finger and stood, and he kissed me while tourists walked past and took our picture without us asking. We didn't move back to the safe house. Sal had sold it a month after his acquittal, had liquidated the physical reminders of that time when I'd been a captive and he'd been a captor, and we'd both been learning what it meant to choose each other. Instead, we found an apartment in the city, a real apartment, not a penthouse, not something ostentatiously expensive. A place with old wood floors and windows that didn't face other buildings and a kitchen that we both liked cooking in. I went back to school, finished my degree in art history, and eventually started working with Sal on his legitimate collections. I wasn't great at the business side, but I was good at understanding what made something worth preserving. We got married on the 1-year anniversary of the day he'd walked into Rossetti's diner. We didn't invite many people. His grandmother, a few of his lawyers, my old boss Vinny, who'd become somehow less insufferable over time. I wore white, which felt ironic for a woman who'd watched as much violence as I had, but Sal insisted. He said I deserved at least one moment of believing I was pure. The night after the wedding, we went back to the library where we'd first kissed in front of a fireplace. His grandmother had given us the key to the house for the weekend. "I have something for you," he said after we'd made love, while we were lying in the dark and talking the way we'd learned to do when everything else fell away. He turned on the bedside lamp and handed me a leather journal. When I opened it, I found detailed records. Everything he'd done in the years before meeting me, every operation, every crime, every person he'd hurt. "Why?" I asked. "Because," he said, "you deserve to know what you're forgiving. Not the sanitized version, not the version I tell myself so I can sleep. The actual version." I looked through it, and it was terrible. All of it. More terrible than I'd imagined in some ways. There were names. People he'd ordered hurt. People whose lives he'd destroyed for profit or principle or just because they were inconvenient. But there was something else too. In the margins, in the spaces between entries, there were questions. Doubts. The record of a man slowly becoming horrified by what he'd become. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said quietly. "I'm just asking that you see me clearly, that you understand what you're choosing." I closed the journal and set it aside. Then I pulled him close, and I held him the way I had on that night when the power went out, and the world seemed to be ending. "I forgive you," I said, "not because what you did was forgivable, but because I believe you when you say you're trying to be different, and because I love the person you're becoming more than I hate the person you were." He cried then, actually cried, tears running down his face while he held me. I felt the moment something in him let go. Not all of it. The weight of what he'd done would never fully disappear. But enough of it to let him breathe. Years later, I would sometimes think about the woman I'd been in that diner, throwing a coffee pot at a gun. I'd think about how young she was, how unaware of consequence, how willing to sacrifice herself for a stranger. She was still me, but barely. She'd been remade by fire and fear and love in that particular order. Sal and I never talked about returning to his old life, not after that first year. But we both understood that the possibility existed. That somewhere in the house there were people who would take him back, who would welcome him into the fold, who would give him back the power he'd walked away from. He never took them up on it. Instead, he became something that he'd probably never imagined. He became happy. Not blissfully, not without complexity, but genuinely, in the way that only people who've lived through darkness understand. We had a daughter, a girl with my eyes and his stubbornness, and I watched him with her and understood that his grandmother had been right. He was protecting beautiful things now, not metaphorically, literally, a child, a marriage, a life that was built on honest work and small moments of genuine joy. The scar above his eyebrow faded over time, not completely, but enough that you had to look carefully to see it. By the time our daughter was old enough to ask about it, it was just part of his face, part of the map of where he'd been. "Your father made some mistakes," I told her when she asked. "But he learned from them, and now he tries very hard to be better." It wasn't a complete answer. It wasn't even entirely truthful. But it was the answer she deserved at that age. Something that acknowledged the complexity without asking her to carry it yet. On the anniversary of the night I'd thrown the coffee pot, 3 years later, Sal woke me up at midnight. He was holding something in his hands. "I've been meaning to show you this," he said. It was a painting. Small, oil on canvas. A study of a woman mid-motion, her face caught between fear and determination. It was me. Not a perfect rendering, but captured in the moment of choosing. "Where did you get this?" I asked. "I painted it," he said. "A few months ago. I wanted to remember what you looked like when you saved me. Not the fear part, but the other part. The part where you decided that throwing a coffee pot at a man with a gun was worth doing even though you had no reason to think it would work. I looked at the painting, and I realized it was the most honest thing he'd ever made. More honest than the journal, more honest than any confession. "It's beautiful," I said. "No," he said. "You're beautiful. The painting is just trying to capture why." We hung it in our apartment, in the place where we could see it every morning. A reminder that sometimes courage isn't a big thing. Sometimes it's just throwing a coffee pot and accepting the consequences of saving someone you don't know. Sometimes love is built on that, on moments of blind faith and the slow, impossible work of becoming someone new.